And on the case this evening, massive protests have broken out in Nepal earlier today over the Oli government's decision to ban 26 social media sites and the alleged corruption in the government. Thousands of youngsters and journalists took to the streets to protest against the move. Angry protesters breached Nepal's parliament complex and demolished a portion of the boundary wall of the complex. The Nepal police soon retaliated to control the protests, and so far 19 people have lost their lives due to the police firing. The Prime Minister of Nepal, KP Sharma Oli, says that his government is not against social media platforms but against their arrogance and belittling of the country. Oli added that for a year the government had been asking social media networks to register under new regulations and be accountable, but there was no compliance. What all has the Nepal Prime Minister claimed? Let's try and understand what he's been saying. He has said that Nepal mandates a listing of these social media platforms. He's also gone on to add that they were asked to operate within the legal framework that exists within that country. YouTube, Facebook and X have failed to comply with these regulations, and notices were sent to 24 social media platforms. There's no official registration despite several notices that have gone out. The bill has been in Parliament to regulate social media platforms as well. This, however, is not the first time we are seeing such a large-scale protest take place. Just last year, we have witnessed in the South Asian region massive protests taking place in Bangladesh as well because of the repeated internet shutdown. Let's understand whether Bangladesh model is repeating itself in Nepal. We've seen the repeated internet shutdowns. In fact, we have seen in Nepal how there were 26 social media sites that were banned overnight. Now, Bangladesh has seen media and protesters who have blamed the police. Here we've seen journalists, in fact, joining the youth in protest. We've also seen how grave charges surfaced against the Prime Minister in Bangladesh and Nepal. Protesters are also calling out government corruption. In Bangladesh, it was classified as student protests. The Nepal government has termed it as a Gen Z protest. We've also seen how the entire matter has escalated, with Bangladesh protesters taking over the Parliament House. We've also seen, of course, how the PM House was vandalized and military rule then ensued in Nepal. Protesters have infiltrated the Parliament complex. There's more escalation that could potentially take place because of the kind of protests that have been planned over the next few days. Now, as the anger continues to simmer against the Oli government in Nepal, protesters have accused the Nepal government of corruption. What began as a peaceful march escalated when protesters broke through barricades and entered restricted zones near Parliament with placards saying "End corruption" and "Not connection." But this latest protest cannot be seen in isolation and begs the larger question: is regional stability of the subcontinent on text? In 2022, we had seen in Sri Lanka widespread protests take place. Now, this was over the government's economic mismanagement. It was accused of failing to address public debt. Bangladesh, as we've been discussing, has seen student protests over quota in government jobs. We've seen over 300 killed in the Bangladesh agitation, and Sheikh Hasina's government then getting toppled. We've seen how in Nepal, now their youth leading mega protests against the Oli government. Social media blockade, of course, is the immediate trigger, and the Home Minister stepping down amidst these protests.
अगाडि म उभिरहेको ठाउँमा स्वाट गोली गरेर मेरो पछाडिको साथीले हातमा यी पुरा हात उडिसक्यो पुरै गोली लाग्यो गोली डाइरेक्ट गोली लाग्यो भित्रबाट अहिले पनि तुरुन्त गोली चलिरहेको आवाज आइरहेको छ सुनिरहेको छौं हामी यो संसद भित्रबाट डाइरेक्ट गोली मेरो साथी उ अगाडि त्यहाँ उभिरहेको बेला डाइरेक्ट टाउकोमा गोली हानेछ भुइँमा हाल्नु पर्ने गोली डाइरेक्ट खुट्टामा पनि नहालेर जेमा हानिरहेछ यो कहाँको न्याय हो नि यी स्ट्यान्डहरुमाथि
यहाँ आउने बित्तिकै यहाँ अब पीसफुल प्रोटेस्ट गर्ने भनेर हामी प्लान गरेर आएको थियौं। यहाँ साथीहरु हामी यहाँ आउने बित्तिकै यहाँ एकदम नराम्रो इन्सिडेन्ट, यहाँ पुलिसहरुको मिसबिहेभ हेर्न सकिन्छ। यहाँनिर जबरजस्ती युवाहरुलाई गोली हानिरहेको छ। यो पीसफुल प्रोटेस्टको यो अलिकति पनि हैन। यो माथिबाट बसेको मान्छेहरुले यस्तो गर्न पाउँदैन। यो के कसो यो एकदम गलत भइरहेको छ। यहाँनिर युवाहरुले अब केही एन्टी करप्सन एक्टिभिटिजहरु पनि गर्न पाइएन भने यहाँ फ्रीडम अफ स्पीच, राइट टु स्पीच केही पनि छैन। यहाँ मिनेटमा यहाँ एकजनाले यहाँ गोली हानेको यहाँ इन्सिडेन्ट देख्न सकिरहेको छौं हामीहरु। यो एकदम गलत हो। यो
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, joining us on the show is Upendra Yadav, former Deputy Prime Minister of Nepal. Also with us is Manjeev Singh Puri, former Ambassador of India. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the show this evening. Mr. Yadav, let me begin by asking you, do you believe that this particular social media ban that has happened, is it something that is genuinely something that the decision was taken in national interest, or is there some kind of arrogance or authoritarian impulse that's reflected in this decision?
Thank you. I think there are three problems. First of all, the youths are mostly unemployed. Unemployment problem is there. Another problem is the corruption and the wrong decision of the government that banned social medias. All these three are the major problems. And when the youths they started demonstration, government used the excess forces and brutally tried to crush the move. So it happens there. Up to now, there are more than 20 people has been died through the bullet due to the excess force of use there. And this is very tragic for the Nepal. And throughout the country, in all the cities, the people are demonstrating still now at this time also.
Right, but what does this really mean for, what will happen now in coming days in the near future, Mr. Yadav?
Now the youths, they are protesting against the government, not the system, against the corrupt government and the activities of the government that ban the social medias. The lots of people, they are having their jobs through the social medias, their business through the social medias, and they are against it. And this is the protest. This protest is not, I think, they are self-motivated.
Okay, let me take this question across to Mr. Manjeev Singh Puri. Mr. Puri, how do you look at this in the context of what we've seen happen in India's neighborhood in the recent past? Of course, we've seen similar scenes coming from Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh. Of course, Nepal is a country where India has, close historic cultural ties. But are we seeing something or these developments and protests taking place snowball into a much larger issue? And is there need for India to worry at all?
Madhav, thank you very much. So let me say something to you startling. Nepal is a very globalized country. So are Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. In the case of Nepal, nearly 30% of the Nepalese citizens are all over the world, and I'm excluding India. They are in the Gulf, they're in the United States, they're in Europe, in Southeast Asia, Australia. So, connection even with families for the sake of remittances, etc. is important. Social media has allowed a great deal of this globalization to get internalized there. And so therefore, whatever the Supreme Court judgments and whatever the rationale behind it, it was a matter that needed to be handled with extreme political dexterity, not just care. And I'm afraid that was not what was done. The youth, it was known very much that there is disgruntlement there. There is a feeling of frustration. And why is it there? Mr. Yadav mentioned the case of unemployment. Nepal hasn't really recovered after COVID. There are a number of issues on the economy. So people feel disgruntled. They want to take out their anger and frustration. And the reality is that three people have held the Nepalese prime ministership for the last 10 years in a kind of rotating circle. So, they have an easy target to go to. But that meant that the very vibrant people who are holding political office needed to be much more astute with their ear to the ground and needed to have handled this much better. Secondly, Nepal has not seen this kind of number of deaths from police firing, etc. in one go, especially in the Pahari area, Kathmandu being the center of the city and somewhere else. And this is extremely problematic. The Home Minister has resigned, but this is a very serious political issue, and it is something that the government needs to take very seriously. Now, you asked the question about other countries. Look, in a sense, it is a very clear case of people in our neighborhood becoming politically conscious and having aspirations driven by globalization, without any doubt, and their own governments not really being able to come to their rescue. And so therefore, this comes out whenever there is a possibility, whenever these kind of things happen. In Nepal, it was this social media ban. In Sri Lanka, as well as in Sri Lanka, it was as a result of economic mismanagement. In Bangladesh, it was an election. So, those are issues which bring people to the fore. Demands a great deal of political dexterity. Of course, we are worried, we are looking at it, and so on. But these are democratic aspirations, and
Right.
these are some things which their local leadership needs to be extremely well attuned to and responsive.
Right. And let me take that question of political implications of this. Mr. Yadav, let me ask you, sir, what does this really mean for the political stability, and what are the risks if this anger, transforms in coming days into a bigger movement?
Now, what will be the government's next move? It will depend upon that. If the government will address the demands of the youths and leaving the ban from the social media, then it may be normalized. Otherwise, if the government will try to cross the movement by the use of force, then it will change the situation. Situation will be changed and it will be different.
So what are the reforms? What would your demand be from the government? What should they do immediately?
Government have to address the demand of the youth and withdraw the ban on the what is imposed on the social medias, and must address their grievances.
Right. Mr. Puri, what would be India's options if this does escalate into a much bigger sort of law and order situation on ground, number one, and number two, if it leads to more political instability? We have seen certain episodes where there's been political tumult. What do you think India's approach would be? How have we reacted in the past, and how are you looking at this situation development in terms of India's diplomatic response?
So, Madhav, let me first segregate this particular question. I think Nepal has more than enough adequate abilities to be able to deal with it. They need to deal with it politically, and they also need to do what Mr. Yadav has just mentioned. First of all, withdraw these orders. People tend to say, we've got victory. Let them go back, and then try and see what you can do to hear them. Now, you played at the start of this program something from Prime Minister Oli, sort of staunchly defending the ban. It's all right. The government had its own views, etc. That's fine. But you need to be much more mindful of what happens among the youth, who are now in Nepal much more empowered, I must say, in comparison to a country like India, because their exposure to globalization is much greater. Secondly, this particular government needs to understand that this has happened in the Pahad areas. They are the guys who control Nepal. That is the part where the entire political fulcrum of Nepal rests. And so, therefore, this is not just a riot, not just a crowd management thing. It's a very serious matter and needs to be taken seriously. What should we do? We should counsel the Nepalese. We should certainly counsel them, and I'm sure we are doing that. Political issues need to be tackled politically, and such kind of strong authoritative action should not be taken just like that, no matter if you think or you perceive that you have a certain grievance, as the Prime Minister is reported to have said that they're maligning the country. Yes, we've had these kind of instances in India, but you need to deal with these in a manner which is acceptable to the people, because after all, it is a small country. People do reach out across the world, and it is not a huge dispersed place. And this is a matter which requires good and, let me say, sagacious political handling, and one which is empathetic to the people. Very important.
Right. Right. And Mr. Yadav, if I can ask you, in Bangladesh, we have seen similar student protests take place where the ruling elite sort of underestimated the young demonstrations. The outcome was very different. We saw how Sheikh Hasina had to eventually step down. Do you think that the government in Nepal is making a similar mistake when it comes to Gen Z over there?
In Bangladesh, what happened, the students were started, their demands were concerned about the reservations, not the power, not to change the system. It was at the beginning. But the Bangladesh government, what happened? The government have done so many mistakes there. They used, the government used excess forces there, and that turned in mass movement. So Nepal has the time now, Government has time to think with the cool mind and address the youths. This is the right time.
Right. And Mr. Puri, your response in terms of the comparison that is being drawn to what we've seen in Bangladesh. I know you've kind of answered this question, but is the lesson there very clear, the writing there very clear for the government to see the experience of neighboring countries and what should not be done?
No, Madhav, you're absolutely right. Do you think the young students don't know? Do you think the politicians don't know? In our age of social media, news spreads very fast. And when the things were happening in Bangladesh, many people would think this can easily happen in Nepal. So this demanded even more, let me say, ear to the ground, even more understanding of the people, and an even more empathetic understanding of where the people are. And let me make this point to you. You know, we hear a lot about protests in the Madhes, etc. And I am very sympathetic towards all that. After all, in democracies, you should be inclusive, you should meet everybody's demands. But Nepal, the way it has been structured, is truly a country of the Paharis. And Kathmandu Valley matters a hell of a lot in this whole thing. And therefore, these young people who bring about this demographic dividend, etc., you need to be understanding of their aspirations, and you need to be empathetic towards them. And that's most important. And non-authoritarian approaches, which are political, is what is needed.
Okay. Mr. Puri and Mr. Yadav, I'd like to thank both of you for joining us and explaining to us what really is happening in Nepal and what we can expect in coming days. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
The News Hour